Well, Vern here, and welcome back to Pastors on Porn. Today we are going to talk about potholes. Potholes are those things if you live in warm and cold and four-season climates, when the weather changes, all of our roads get big potholes in them and we hit them and it wrecks the suspension of our vehicles. And today I want to introduce Dr. Laura Nelson, who's written a book called Avoiding the Potholes. And I'm so glad to have you on the show. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Dr. Laura, and just talk a little bit about who you are and what brings you here.
Okay, well, so nice to be part of this, Vern. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I am a pastor of Olivet Baptist Church in New Westminster, BC. Been here for just over 12 years.
Oh, wow.
Been a wonderful place to pastor. It's been a great church. But actually just submitted my resignation. That will be in mid-June.
Congratulations.
So, time here is coming to a close. Yeah, so had a long history of after I came to faith, really feeling called to ministry, but because of my gender, all that was on my radar was actually Christian education. So that's where I kind of started. And then, things have unfolded to then, feeling called to be a senior pastor. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, having co-pastored with my wife for 20 years, we know all of the ins and outs of the realities, and our new pastoral couple, she's actually the one that does most of the preaching and teaching. So she's an amazing teacher. And so, we know all the nuances and challenges of women stepping into that role, right, and trying to read different people's reactions and responses to things. So, well, I want to talk, how I heard about you. It was simply, I'm working with a guy whose wife basically called me up and said, "Hey, I need you to work with my husband." And he said, "Yeah, that's a good thing." And so we've been working together. And then she started talking about this book that she was reading and he would reference, and the book was called Avoiding the Potholes. So I went online and looked it up, and I saw the byline was this: Understanding the Devastation of Sexual Misconduct in the Clergy and Avoiding It. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to have you on the show. And you gotta tell me what got you interested in that topic enough to actually write a book about it, and give us a bit of a background of what brought you to this and why you made that such a major part of the effort of what you've been putting your hands to here.
But there's been probably several things, Vern, that led to that. So one was years ago, meeting a gentleman at a conference center who he had been a pastor. He had had his own, wrestling with things. And so all he was doing was actually ministering to pastors who were struggling in these areas. And so, just lots of different conversations with him. And it just, I guess, captivated my heart, seeing kind of the difficulty. Went to a couple of conferences with him and his wife, delving into this more. So that was sort of an initial piece. Then I kept having people, guys that would just confess to me how they were struggling with porn. So it was interesting how I think the Lord has given me grace and, understanding. So it was kind of like that door was open. And then with our denomination, I was actually asked to be involved in something called a discipline review committee.
Okay.
So when pastors had crossed any kind of sexual line, there was like, okay, let's go through what happened, and then walking with them through recovery. So that was interesting to, enter into and be part of that. And then the last piece is my own story. So I ended up having a couple of affairs. That happened before I became a pastor, but I was involved in ministry.
Yep. And
then really questioning, how on earth did I allow this to happen?
Right.
And so there was this question of why did this occur? And here I am wanting to go into ministry. Could this happen again?
Right.
So when I worked on my doctorate, that's what I spent my thesis on, was exploring the why. So interviewed a whole bunch of pastors, like, why do you think this happened? Why did you cross this line? So then from there it was like, okay, if these are the different whys, let's kind of put this in a book to help pastors. Okay, what are the things that we need to look at so we don't fall into this hole?
Well, that's a great preview. Again, it's the whole idea of avoiding the potholes. And, obviously in our society, we're so connected. We hear, of the problems with, a big name pastor of a mega church, and everyone goes, "Oh
Yep.
my goodness, we have a problem." But you would obviously recognize from your conversations and working at a denominational level, there is a huge part under the surface
Yeah.
of the church, smaller churches, people who are struggling in silence. And so you
Mhm.
have that imagery, but then you could take that same imagery of the iceberg and say, in people's lives, there's a little bit of people's lives that's seen above the waterline, but the why is this whole, part of their lives under the water that it sounds like your book was seeking to get at, to say
Mhm.
what's really going on in
Yeah.
that. So I'd love to hear from you just in terms of if you were going to sum it up in, again, I encourage people to get the book, but if you were going to say, there's really some common reasons, some common breadcrumbs that you've noticed with pastors who end up, wrecking their ministry or finding themselves in real trouble. What would be those breadcrumbs? What would be those things that or is there any patterns, I guess?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think there's some things to look at. One thing is it's not one thing.
Right.
You can't just say, okay, there's just one thing, and if you avoid that, you're good. No, it's all sorts of factors. And I think one place to begin is for pastors to realize, okay, this could happen to me.
Right.
You have to realize how vulnerable you are and that the enemy is having a field day in this area. If there is one way to bring pastors down, this is it. You can take a pastor out by, some kind of illness or whatever,
Right.
but this occurs, it affects then marriages, affects family, the church, and the broader society.
Right.
So yeah, the enemy's having a field day. So you need to be aware of just your own vulnerability. I think one thing that, is maybe surprising, but is our spiritual life. You'd think as pastors, okay, we've got everything together and, our spiritual lives are strong,
Right.
but, it's easy to let that slip. You're preparing sermons. So
Right.
you're working on all this stuff for other people. So yeah, you're in God's word, working on the next sermon, you're working on Bible study, a devotional, whatever it is, or you're reading something, go, oh, this would be a good verse for so-and-so,
Right.
rather than, okay, where is the Lord speaking to me? Where do I need to grow? Sabbath. How many pastors take some kind of Sabbath?
Right.
So it's easy to let our spiritual life slip, which is unfortunate, but something that happens. I think another key area is looking at our past. Sometimes we can think, okay, well, that's in the past.
Right.
Moved on with the Lord or whatever, but instead, looking at, okay, what are those places in maybe family of origin?
Right.
Was my family rigid or disengaged? Where are those places of woundedness? Where did you first, were you exposed to porn? Where did that first happen? Where are those, sexual experiences that then can lead you down the road to other activity? Because sometimes, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, interesting here that you wonder how much of that actually gets asked at seminary, where people actually sit down with, different seminaries that are creating pastors, and
Mm-hmm.
they actually say, we need an exhaustive check under the hood of what
Yeah.
you're bringing to this role, your sexual
Mm-hmm.
background, your relational background, were your parents
Exactly.
divorced, what were the hurts did you go through? I'm dealing with so many guys that are confessing childhood sexual abuse,
Yes.
both
Huge.
on, the giving end and in terms of receiving end of that,
Yeah.
and the shame of that, and guys that are 10-20 years into um marriage, and they've not told anybody that they were sexually abused as a
Mm-hmm.
child. And so
Yeah.
you're
There's such
going,
shame. Yeah.
how would you ever go on a trip if you're never looking at any of the gauges on
Mm-hmm.
your vehicle? Is your gas full? Have you changed the oil?
Yep.
And and we just do such a disservice to just kind of, maybe it's faulty theology. Well, we're all saved by grace, and all of that's past. We've all been cleansed from our sins, and I think it's maybe from that, or I don't know. Do you see that going on?
Oh, totally. And I think that it's just foundational. And I think we have to, it's bringing it into the light. Mm-hmm. So it's confessing it, bringing it before the Lord, before someone else, like, this is what happened. This is what occurred in my life, and not holding on to it. Sometimes we're acting out of these places, not even realizing what we're doing. So bringing them into the light, letting the Lord then heal them so that we choose how we respond. Because sometimes if we have been in a family or there's been abuse or whatever it is, we're maybe seeking affirmation. Right. And how many pastors come into the role, seeking, approval, affirmation? Maybe it starts off fine, but churches can be difficult places.
Yeah.
And then when you don't have that affirmation, then you can look to these other places for fulfillment. Easy to go. Let's look at porn or whatever to find some way of, release and being able to be filled yourself. Yeah.
I was joking in one of my podcasts, or the girl in the second row that always laughs especially loud at your jokes, or when you're preaching, you start looking to that person sitting there who you feed off their affirmation. Exactly. In fact, I did a podcast on why pastors, I believe, are especially susceptible to are sexually vulnerable for a whole bunch of different reasons. So we've got the breadcrumbs of feeling, not recognizing our vulnerability, perhaps having not a robust spiritual life. It's a professional. It's like we have a professional for persona, and our own walk, our own relationship with God suffers, and then an undealt with past.
Yes.
As part of that. Any other things else that come to mind?
Yeah, I guess a few other things would be, our whole physical health. How many pastors are overweight? And I can relate to that, that we don't pay attention to, exercising, eating well, and just taking care of ourselves. How do you deal with stress? Stress is inevitable. It's not like you're going to get rid of it. How do you deal with it, and deal with it in a healthy way? Loneliness, that's a big part for pastors. So, and then your marriage, those kind of things. And like I said in the beginning, it's not just one thing. It's kind of all these things. Right. So if you're not taking care of yourself, your spiritual life is waning a bit, and, you have all these factors, then it's kind of like it implodes and you find yourself acting out in some way.
It's interesting, Dr. Laura. I was talking to a friend of mine who was just starting out the pastoral ministry, and we were talking, and I said, what, here's what I want you to do. And he was cool with it. He says, I want you to go and spend some time with a counselor. And he says, well, I'm not really struggling with anything. I says, I know, that's the point. I'd like you to develop a lifeline that you learn to talk with somebody, so that as you get into pastoring, that will already be a habit that you've developed. A little bit like with premarital counseling. You get together with couples who, before they married, they don't need any of your help. They love each other. They can talk about anything. They're just going to have amazing lives. But you say, I know you don't really need this, but let's develop the habit of talking about with a counselor. So just hypothetically, if you ever do need to reach out, you will have developed the habit. And they nod at you, and, you patronize them, and they look at you, but, then all of a sudden, 6 months in, I can't talk with my spouse about anything. Right.
Yeah. And at a church, who do you go to? You have to have someone. So I think that's a great piece of advice to give.
So let's look. One of the things that your book promised, and I have to get a copy here, is what can leaders do to prevent this from taking place? So obviously I hear your heart is that we would be proactive and preventative. So if somebody comes to you and, before we get to somebody coming to you who's struggled or fallen, let's talk on the proactive end. At one level, you could just say, well, we'll just work on the opposite of some of the things we've already talked about, develop a strong spiritual life, don't be so invulnerable, take care of your physical health. Is there anything that you would just say proactively, preventatively, these are the things that are going to more often than not keep you from getting into trouble?
Hmm.
I mean, I know we partly touched on that already in terms.
Yeah. Um, one thing I think is I found interesting was just the nature of pastoral ministry. It does put us in a really vulnerable place.
Right.
Because boundaries, you go to a counselor, they have really clear boundaries of what's expected. Right, whereas for pastors, you don't have that. You go to a baseball game or whatever, you go to somebody's home, and there is that close interaction. So I think it's being a bit of aware of all these things that you have to kind of start there, kind of like you mentioned about the car. Okay, let's look at the dashboard. Where are maybe some flashing lights that can come along? So that you realize, okay, this is a possible pothole, place where I could fall into something. So it's shoring up your life, okay, I'm going to make a commitment that I don't let my spiritual life wane, that I do have some support. I've got someone that I can go to, like you said, to arrange that ahead of time, so that you've got these parameters around you that can just help.
Well, out here in Chilliwack, which is about an hour and a half east of you, we're right next to the Fraser River, which is one of the biggest rivers in Canada. Mm-hmm. And there's been so much work on building up the dikes. And then it kind of slides. And then what happens is all the sentiment in the, this is a great imagery. I got to work on it. The sentiment builds up on the floor of the Fraser, and the dikes aren't as high because the water's now higher. And so they always have this battle going on because the fishery and wildlife people don't want people to dredge the water because the fish. But what happens is every year the dikes become more and more unstable, and there needs to be that constant work in terms of shoring up the dikes. I mean, here's just a little classic example, and I was really blessed in 15 to 20 years of ministry, co-pastoring with my wife, which is not everyone's experience or reality. But I can't tell you how many times I would get a phone call from somebody. It would be a gal, and we had usually really clear boundaries. But I don't know what it was. It's almost like they didn't see me as a real person. And all of a sudden, some girl would say, I haven't had sex with my husband for 3 months or 6 months. And I'm going to myself, I don't want to hear that, and all of a sudden my mind starts thinking, oh my good, and people would not, if I didn't continually shore up the dikes. And then my first thing was go and talk to my wife, we would talk to them. And anytime there was a marriage, issue, because we also did marriage courses for a dozen years together. So every time someone had a marriage issue, they almost used me as a bit of a surrogate sounding off point, or expecting me to go to their husband and tell them to smarten up. So you had all of these, doesn't matter how often you laid the boundaries down, there was always these kind of pushing of the water against the dikes. And if there's any part of me that likes that affirmation,
exactly,
you could just see how that goes, right?
Oh yeah. It's just this slippery slope, and can happen so subtly, just sort of one little thing at a time. And then before you know it, you've succumbed to something. Yeah. And I think there's also, be realistic about how you feel, or honest about how you feel. So, if you find yourself attracted to a woman, or, drawn to them, to be able to confess that. Yeah. You know what? This person was giving me attention, and it felt really good. Things have been hard lately, and I just need to say, this is how I'm feeling. Yeah.
And here's the crazy thing, that it's even more subtler than that. Subtler than that. It's not, I'm really attracted to this person. It's more of, I really like having this person around. Yeah. They really, I really feel good when they laugh at my jokes, or I really kind of look over to them to see how they're responding. It's not even I'm sexually attracted to them. It's just, how subtle it is. And they happen to be good looking, but I'm not really attracted to them. But I just like having them in my life, Well,
it's when people are attuning to you, and if you're wrestling with the board at church, or, people that
Yeah.
are complaining about stuff. And then you have someone who is, laughing at your jokes, giving you that attention. Yeah, you're bound to be drawn to it.
Yeah. And my wife doesn't always laugh at my jokes, and she's got, and she knows me better than anybody. And sometimes I annoy her, and no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
talk to me then about what it would be like. Obviously I haven't done a lot of work, and I hope to talk with more denominational people. So this is really a neat window into denominational thinking in terms of that. Tell me what you think. If you are on the board and your heart is to support your pastor so that this doesn't happen, or perhaps you're, as part of a denomination and you're trying to create systems and ways that are not punitive, but just that are supportive. How would you say an elder comes to you and go, my goodness, I don't want, the church down the road had this train wreck. How do we do a better job as a board, an elder, to support our pastor? Because we love, him or her, and we want to take our responsibilities and our care and our love and our support seriously. What would you say to them?
Well, one thing that I'm really grateful for, because I have been involved with our denomination, is we have a ministerial protocol and procedure, book. And in there, it was basically saying, if you're struggling with porn, you're out. And so I was very glad that I was able to get a change in this, that if a pastor comes forward and says, look, I'm struggling with porn, that with our regional minister, will get help. Yeah. And because I think so much of it is hidden, the reality is, you probably know the percentage well of how many are struggling with porn. Okay. So let's bring this again into the light and say, I'm struggling with this, help me. Yeah. So I was very grateful to have that change come about.
Good for you, and playing a role there, because how much of that punitive approach simply drives the problem underground until it burns the whole house down.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. It's, kind of like a gateway drug, is I think way I said it in the book, to other things. So in terms of a church board, I think they need to realize that their pastors are vulnerable. So what can they do to shore them up? That, like windows in the office, or, just have them help with some boundaries around some things. Programs like Covenant Eyes, pay for it to have it on the church computer. Paying for some counseling so that the pastor has someone to turn to, that's just kind of maybe part of their benefit package. Okay, this is what we're going to do for you, so you have support. Making sure that pastors get adequate time off. That they're not getting burnt out 24/7 with all the demands of people, but that they need Sabbath. They need some time to regenerate. So those would just be a few things that come to mind.
Yeah, let me just give a plug for sabbaticals here. Not just weekly Sabbaths. I've been a pastor for 30 years and 25 years in this last setting, and we took 3 sabbaticals.
Nice.
One in LA with our family, one in Great Britain with our family.
Oh, wow.
And made it, those 6 or 7 year, 3 months off. And it wasn't, let me just, oh my goodness. I've talked to so many pastors, their version of sabbatical is the board comes to say, okay, we want you to read these 8 books and do this paper. And it's like,
no,
all of BS. It's like, that's the best. So we want you to do more of what you normally do. Oh yeah. Don't get me going on that one.
It's good.
I talked to another local pastor, and it's like, well, why need a sabbatical? Why do I need a sabbatical if I'm taking my holiday time? And I'm thinking, dude, you just don't get it.
Yeah.
You're setting yourself up, and he set his successors up for a fall because he expected kind of this hardcore Protestant work ethic to just be, So
Yeah, that's been a battle for me because I grew up with, working hard and
Yeah.
yeah, have to really fight against that.
Hard
Yeah.
work is next to godliness. Isn't that what it says in the Bible?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's, I'm so appreciative of that. I definitely want to encourage people to read your book. It's called Avoiding the Potholes, and you can get it on Amazon, I noticed, and other places. Dr. Laura, just tell me a little bit about kind of what I know this coming year, you said you're planning on stepping back from pastoring this local church. Tell me a little bit of what's on your heart going forward. What do you, you said in an email that you don't want to stop doing ministry. So
Yeah.
just tell me a little bit of what you think God's leading you into going forward.
Yeah. So, it's been great to be here. But I've been here for 12 years and I just turned 65. So, and then with this whole COVID time,
Yep.
kind of felt like it is time for me to leave the church here. And because of my age, then yeah, I'm calling it kind of, retirement.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I don't want to quit doing ministry. So whether, wondering about some, kind of interim filling in for people, preaching periodically, but I think I really want to dive into this whole topic more. It's just like, it's amazing how the Lord has just brought these things along. And like I said, brought a passion for it. A book that I have really appreciated is one called Unwanted by Jay Stringer.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so
Yeah.
I took, I think it's really groundbreaking in this whole area.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I took a training course from Jay from coaching. And so actually have started doing coaching with his material.
Wonderful.
And yeah, I've been doing, I have 5 women that I'm coaching right now. So it's a learning process for me, how to do this, how to, help them walk through these things. Because for women, this is, it presents even more shame. And the stats for women looking at porn and involved in other ways just keep increasing.
It's growing. Definitely.
Oh, yeah. And so, it's kind of like, well, boys will be boys and, but for women, it's like, oh no, women don't look at porn. And so you don't share those things.
Right.
So I'm, glad to be able to dive into that a bit and would love to just help pastors more. To really have a safe place of entering into. So yeah, I would like to really do some of this coaching, mentoring piece and talk about this and how we can, how it can help people.
Well, yeah, my 2 favorite books of all time on just this whole area are Unwanted and Surfing for God. Those are my 2 favorite books. I'll have to have Jay on here at some point as well. I've had Michael Cusick on. Amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited. It sounds like you've been a force for redemption and grace within your denomination in terms of that as well. And I just wish all of God's blessing on you, that the next 10 years, I'm praying for 10 good years of incredible what convergence, what Robert Clinton calls in his book, The Fuller Professor, Making of a Leader. He calls it convergence. So I pray for at least 10 years of convergence on you and your life and ministry going forward. So
I appreciate that.
Thanks for being on the podcast, Laura.
Well, thank you, Vern, for asking. It's been great.
Bye-bye.